Hey everyone, I'm back with a fresh unboxing video me and the shop cat are going to do. So a couple of weeks ago, a representative from Bestarc reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in doing an unboxing and review video for one of their welders. And I said that would be great. And so they sent me the Bestarc Mig145 welder. So I figure I'm going to do sort of a three-part video. The first part is going to be opening the box, taking out all the pieces, seeing what it comes with, and just doing an initial impression. The second part is going to be setting up this welder, putting the flux core wire inside the machine, getting it plugged in, turned on, that sort of stuff. And then the third part of the video is going to be actually doing some welding with it and seeing if I can get a couple of pieces of metal to stick together. So with that said, let's get started and see what's inside. Something else I want to mention real quick is that I am not a professional welder. I am a hobby welder at best. And the welder that I normally use is a Hobart Handler 190. So that's just what I'm used to. And I'm going to not make this a comparison video, but I may look at some of the features that this welder has through the lens of someone who has been using a Hobart for however many years it's been now. Just opening the box, it looks pretty well packaged, and it's pretty small. It's surprisingly small. And it looks pretty much ready to go. It has a 220 volt plug on it by default, but it looks like it can run on 110 volts as well, which is nice to have that flexibility. And I have to say that this is probably one of my favorite colors, so it gets a lot of extra points just right off the bat. This box is some kind of accessory box. It looks like this is the gas line for the shielding gas. So this welder can operate with flux core wire or solid core wire and shielding gas. However, while I do have a tank of gas, it's hooked up to my regular welder. I'm not going to move it over to this because I want this unboxing and testing video to be representative of what you would be able to do right out of the box without having to get any additional pieces. But it is nice that they include this. It looks like it also includes a handle for stick welding. I'm not sure when a situation would warrant using a stick welder over a MIG, maybe high wind conditions, but if you have an idea or recommendation, then definitely drop it in the comments. Of course, it needs a grounding clamp. This looks to be pretty well made and pretty high quality. It is copper, which is nice. That should give a really good connection. The spring is strong, so a lot of times on welders, you clip this on and it's not very strong, so then you move the part and it falls off, and it's just kind of a pain. So the fact that this spring is as strong as it is will be nice just to keep the clamp in place. It looks like it has a carry strap, which is just kind of funny that it really is small and light enough to be able to throw over your shoulder and carry it around. I guess if you have a long enough extension cord, you can just work with it over your shoulder. This is kind of a neat accessory. It looks like because it can do 220 or 110, there's a conversion adapter to convert it from 220 to 110. It must have a mechanism inside to be able to decipher the voltage. Pretty cool and pretty convenient just to be able to use it with what you have available. You don't necessarily have to have a 220. It looks like this is a tool to tighten and loosen these nozzles. Comes with a couple extra tips. It looks like this is maybe another wheel. It may be a different size wheel for a different thickness of wire. And then also interestingly, some pipe dope which I'm assuming is for the gas line. But the way that these fittings work, and maybe some gas line gurus out there can help me out a bit, but in one of my videos when I was setting up my Hobart welder with the shielding gas, I put pipe dope on these connections, but these are, I was told in the comments, these are actually compression fittings, and pipe dope would be detrimental if anything. So it's just kind of interesting that they include that. And then we have two other mystery boxes. Oh, one of these is 0.8 size welding wire, and this is 1.0. So this is 0.8 millimeter and 1.0 millimeter. This looks like it's flux core. This one is not. Just looking at the box, 30 thousandths solid wire and 40 thousandths flux core wire. So this other wheel must be, if you're using the smaller wire, it has a 0.8 on it. I'm sure those match. I'm guessing the one in the machine is the 1.0, which also means that out of the box, this machine is set up to just feed it flux core and be on your way. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And the last piece in here is the instructions, which I will look over and see if there's anything noteworthy. While this should be a complete welder out of the box and have all of the components, or at least some version of all of the components that someone would need to be able to unbox it, set it up, plug it in, and start welding, it is missing the PPE, or personal protective equipment, that is required for welding. And I'll link some stuff in the description that I think looks good, but I like using an auto darkening helmet. It's just way easier and way more convenient than a non-auto darkening helmet. This one happens to be from Harbor Freight, and they don't need to be terribly expensive. You do need a good pair of welding gloves. These are just good to keep your hands safe. And then also I like using, it's basically a reverse jacket, like a welding jacket, or an apron with sleeves that you put on from the front, and then it just clips in the back. It's open back. It keeps your arms from getting sunburnt or actually burnt from sparks, and I just find it to be really nice. Plus, it's nice to be able to protect the stuff that you're wearing, so you don't have to wear absolutely junky clothes to be able to weld. You can wear something that is reasonable or comfortable, and then just throw that on over it, and you'll be totally protected. So now I want to look at this machine in a little bit more detail. But before I do that, I want to point out a couple things that I saw in the manual. It looks like there is a 220 version and a 110 or 220 version of this welder. This one is the 110 or 220 volt version. This might indicate that this is the US market, and the 220 only is designed for the rest of the world. I just wanted to point that out. I don't know if there's a difference between them other than the fact that the adapter is included or not included, but I just don't have that information. The whole machine is only 6.3 kilograms, which is 15 pounds maybe, so it's quite light. And something that I thought was particularly interesting is this synergenic control. It looks like it automatically matches the recommended voltage and wire feed for a given setting. That I'm pretty excited to try that feature. It seems really cool to me, particularly coming from the Hobart down below, which has wire speed and a voltage knob, and they're just independent. And it kind of takes some trial and error to get them coordinated with each other to be able to get a good weld. Whereas if this does that work for you, that's going to be a really nice feature. I also want to point out that it looks like this can utilize a TIG torch as well. That is not included in the regular box. That is an additional accessory that I don't have, so I'm not going to be able to try that. But I also want to point out that it doesn't look like there's a connection for the pedal. So I don't know if that means that it's a TIG setup without a foot pedal, or that's another additional accessory. And I also want to point out, it looks like depending on how and where you have the ground cable connected determines whether or not you're setting it up for gas or flux core. I find that interesting. I don't know if that is just a mechanism to tell the machine whether or not you are using gas, although I'm not sure why it would care. But again, maybe somebody who is more familiar with this type of stuff can throw a comment below, and feel free, if you're watching this video, definitely go through the comments for any other suggestions or corrections that others may have. It also has a chart to be able to determine what you're welding, the thickness, the wire diameter, and sort of some initial settings for that. Looking at this machine a little bit closer, it really looks pretty straightforward. Obviously, I'm not sure what these buttons do without the screen being on and it being plugged in, but it looks like there's a spring-loaded latch on both sides, which opens the top like a hood. There's some information on the inside of the hood that sort of just gives you some settings type tips, as well as some instructions on how to load the wire. I do like how this welder opens from the top. My Hobart opens from the side, and it's just kind of inconvenient to change the wire, particularly because of the cart that I have it in. But even if I had it sitting on a table, if there was something sitting next to it, I would have to pull everything apart and get to it. So I just kind of like that this opens from the top like that. But I will say that I know the spool of wire in my Hobart is quite a bit larger than what this has the capacity for. So it looks like this welder is going to be able to hold a maximum of, this looks like a 1/2 kilogram roll. Of course, it's not totally filled up, but this diameter is probably the max amount of wire that you will be able to load into this machine. So if you are somebody who wants to get a welder to do a lot of welding, this may not give you quite as much mileage before you have to change the wire. That said, it looks like it's going to be very quick and easy to change the wire, so that may actually be a non-issue as long as you just have extra spools on hand. Next thing, because we are using the flux core wire, we have to configure the machine to be in flux core mode, which means taking this lead and putting it into this negative connector, and it seems to just slide in and tighten. This is probably a pretty standard machine connector, so that just locks in like that. And then of course the negative lead goes into the positive negative plug, and that works the same way. Hopefully those don't come loose and they actually stay in place when welding, otherwise that would be irritating. And I'm also going to go ahead and clip the zip ties just to free this wire up. And same thing with the business end. So now that that's all freed up, we can work on putting the wire in. I'm going to plug it in. I have a 220 volt plug that is easily available, so that's just what I'm going to use. All right, now the machine is plugged in, and the reason that I did that is it looks like there is a feed wire button back here that will be helpful for once I start feeding in the wire, I'll be able to push this and just activate pushing the wire all the way to the end. It looks like if we unlock this and then loosen this, hiding behind there is the roller for the 1 millimeter diameter wire, and this is where this piece would pop out, and the other roller for the 0.8 millimeter wire would be installed. And then to reinstall it, we just have to line the square back up and tighten it in place. I just want to do a quick correction. I noticed on the extra drive wheel that is marked as 0.8 millimeters that if it gets flipped over, it's actually 0.9 millimeters, meaning these two grooves are not the same and cannot be used or should not be used interchangeably. And that led me to look at the one that was installed in the machine, and I had checked it. It was 1.0, which matched the wire diameter that I was using. However, when the wire is in place, it runs along the top groove, not the bottom groove. So if I actually remove it, it's another 0.8 millimeter or 30 thousandths diameter drive configuration, which makes sense because the nozzle that was installed out of the box was a matching 0.8 millimeter nozzle. And I thought it was strange that the drive wheel was 1 millimeter, yet the nozzle was 0.8 millimeter, when in fact from the factory out of the box, it's configured for a 0.8 millimeter wire or 30 thousandths wire. And really what I needed to do is when I swapped the nozzle, I needed to take this out and flip it over. So I was using the 1 millimeter diameter groove on the drive wheel. That's just a minor thing, but I did want to correct the video. It actually comes with two 0.8 millimeter or 30 thousandths drive wheel grooves, a single 0.9 millimeter, which is 35 thousandths, and a single 1 millimeter, which is 40 thousandths. This roller creates some pressure against the drive wheel. This is just a bearing, and that's how the wire gets advanced. So once we install the wire, this will basically lock down, tighten against the wire, and that will let it push forward through the handle of the welder. To actually install the wire, it looks like we have to come back here, loosen this, open up the wire that was given to us, and be careful not to let this go and have all the wire explode off the wheel, because that would just be a big mess. And if this wire ends up getting tangled and crossed on the spool, then the machine is going to have a hard time advancing it, and it's going to affect your ability to comfortably weld. So while I'm holding the end of the wire, and I just about did it there, I'm going to reinstall these pieces. And I know that I need to get that other washer, but I don't want to mess up the wire. Hold on. Okay, and we're back. So this is putting the wire in place with this little wing nut. And this doesn't have to be ultra tight because the spool does have to spin, but you also don't want it to come undone or vibrate off. Also have a wire snips on hand because it's just easier to snip off this hooked end. Feed that into this metal spring tube, and that's going to come out the other side to be continued on through the rest of the line. Okay, so as the wire comes through, it's going to fit into one of these two grooves. Okay, there we go. Now we want to close this tensioner down, drop this to lock it, and just tighten it up. It doesn't have to be ultra tight, but it just has to be tight enough that there's good clamping force here so the drive wheel can actually pull the wire through. With the wire installed, the drive wheel installed, and the tensioner, I don't know if the welder has to be on before this will work, but I'm going to try pushing this wire feed button and advancing it through, and at some point we should see it come out of the tip here. Okay, that didn't work. I'm going to turn the machine on. It's on clear. Maybe there's another switch somewhere. Okay, there's a giant on-off switch on the back of the machine. So now that that's on, the machine is actually on, has power, and let's try advancing the wire again. Okay, it looks like there's a jam somehow because the wire is slipping against the drive wheel and it has not come out the end yet. I wonder if we pull this end off and remove the tip, if it's just somehow jammed in there. So actually I'm going to put this back. Let's see. Oh, okay, so there we go. Now the wire is all the way through the handle, or the cable connected to the handle, and now it's out the end. I'm going to, oh, and here's my problem. It looks like this is the 0.8 millimeter tip, and this is the 1 millimeter flux core wire. So I need to go grab another tip. Looking at the bag of attachments that we got, it looks like, interestingly, oh, this is 0.9. So it comes with 0.8, 0.9, and that's 0.9 millimeter, or 35 thousandths. And the other two are another 0.8, but it's bigger with these flat spots for tightening it, and then the actual 0.1 for the 40 thousandths wire that we are using. I don't know the difference between this shape and the other shape. We can just slide this on the wire, and this way I can tighten it all the way down, put this air cup back on, and then I can go ahead and clip this short. And I think I just answered my own question now that I have the air cup back on, is before the other tip was recessed below the lip of this outer cup, which would indicate that that would be for the shielding gas solid wire. What that will do is that will allow for the gas to surround the weld and prevent oxidation. Because we are using flux core and the flux burns off and creates its own shielding gas during the welding process, I guess it can just stick out a little bit farther. Maybe it's easier to see that way. I don't know the benefit of doing that one way or the other. And it looks like hitting the button, actually it advances the welding. It looks like we're in good shape at this point. I'm going to close the lid, lock it back, and check out the display on the front. So now that the wire is installed and the machine is physically ready to go, let's turn it on and check out what's on this display and get the settings set up. So I'm just going to reach back here, turn on the main power switch, and now it's started up. It looks like this button down here is the selector between MIG, TIG, and I guess that is stick. So we want MIG. Furthermore, we want gasless, and this selector can choose between gas and gasless, which means that the lead configuration does not necessarily tell this welder that it is gas or gasless. There must be some other reason for the leads being in the configuration that they are. But we want gasless or flux core, so we'll set that. Down here is our wire thickness. We are using 40 thousandths wire. So we can go down here. And then this is the control knob for the speed and amperage, or the volts and amperage. Pushing this in allows us to fine-tune the voltage plus or minus 3 volts from that setting, independent of the amperage setting. So with that, I'm just going to leave it on, it goes up to 145 amps and down to 50 amps. So I'm going to start just right in the middle, and we'll see what happens with that. Also, I missed a setting. Two things. One, I've turned this off and turned it back on, and it seems to have remembered the settings, so that's a nice feature that we don't have to go through and reconfigure everything every time we turn the machine off and on. But there's this other setting up here, 2T and 4T. I don't know what those, if those are welding industry terms or not, but per the instructions, it says press switch torch working, stop pressing switch torch stop working. And for 4T is press switch torch working, stop pressing switch torch still working, press switch torch, press torch switch again, torch stop working. So the way that I'm interpreting that is that in the 2T mode, if you pull the trigger, the wire is going to advance. And in the 4T mode, let's see if I can zoom this out a little bit. In the 4T mode, I'm going to push the trigger and the wire is going to continue advancing until I push the trigger again. And that's exactly what happened. So that's a very cool feature if you're doing a lot of long runs of welding and you don't want to have to constantly hold the button in. You can just sort of cruise control it with this 4T mode, and then you just have to double click on the trigger to stop it. Whereas the 2T mode seems like it would be best if you're doing like a stitch weld or spot welds or that sort of thing. Just another nice, cool, convenient feature that I didn't even realize was an option on welders and is definitely not an option on my Hobart welder. So at this point, I've prepared a little test area out of two pieces of just an old bed frame. Whenever I see somebody throwing one of these out, I tend to snag it just because if it's getting thrown out anyway, it's good angle iron and it keeps it out of the landfill, and then it's a nice material to cut up and make something like a tool stand to be able to roll your tools around. Anyway, these are pieces offcuts from the last time that I did that, so I've prepared them. This isn't necessarily a welding tutorial, but you do want to have a clean spot for the ground clamp, so I used an angle grinder and cleaned up and exposed some bare metal through the paint and through the rust for the ground clamp. And then I just hit the spot right here. These are actually two pieces, so this is a joint that I'm going to be welding. And so I cleaned that up just so I can get a good weld on it. All of that said, I do have the machine turned on. I have it set at 100 amps, like I had mentioned before. I don't know necessarily if that's too high or not high enough, but we'll find out. And now I'm going to attach the ground clamp to the clean spot over here and put my other glove on. And at this point, it's also really nice, this machine, the fan does not run unless it's hot enough and needs to run. So it's just, if you're not using it, it's quiet. The fan turns off. It's just nice to be around. So that's a nice feature too. But I'm just going to hit this spot real quick and see how it turns out. And for better or worse, I will show however it turns out. This wire is still too long, so I'm just going to clip that short. And let's see how it goes. Whoops. Got me with that 2T, 4T thing. And I'm actually going to toggle that to the 2T so it just advances when you pull the trigger, stops when you stop pulling the trigger. I will say trying to push that button with these gloves on is not impossible, but it's not super easy. But I also don't think that those buttons, it's not like you're going to be mid-weld and have to switch from gas to gasless or something. So I can't imagine those buttons will need to be pressed terribly often once you have the machine set up for the project that you're about to do. All right, all that said, let's hit this joint and see what happens. So I'm genuinely pretty impressed. I think I'm less impressed. I will say also this button, it seems a little bit stiffer to pull than my Hobart, which is nice because I often put down my Hobart handle and the trigger will push and I'll just run a bunch of wire out. This one seems to be a bit more protected just from the shape of the plastic around it, and then also have just a bit heavier of a trigger. I think I'm genuinely pretty impressed at this point with how well it seemed to weld. And I say that not because I'm impressed with how good of a weld that I did. I'm impressed with how accurate this synergistic amp speed matching seems to be. That was immediately like the first thing that I noticed is as soon as I pulled the trigger and started welding, I'm not saying my settings were necessarily correct. I'm just saying that for one of the given settings, the other one was also correct for that, which seems to be really impressive. Another tool that if you are starting your welding journey, you don't necessarily need to get this weird combo tool. This is a slag hammer and then also a wire brush. Particularly with the flux core wire, it tends to leave a lot of soot and slag on the welds. They're not ultra clean right off the weld. So I'm gonna clean this up. Actually, I'm gonna get a close-up of the weld first, and then I'm gonna clean it up. So let me bring everybody around. And let's take a closer look at this. So here's the weld right as it's done. And I'm just gonna clean it up. It doesn't take much to get it clean. So the settings were actually probably more than what I needed for this thickness of metal. But that said, I'm also very impressed with this weld. I guess I was able to break it without too much trouble. I don't know if that's a symptom of what. Maybe somebody in the comments would be able to help with that. It did feel pretty brittle, and maybe part of that is because I didn't have the back part of it welded. Maybe that's a side effect of flux core. I'm gonna reline these up and hit them again, and just maybe turn the amperage down to, let's try 90. And I'm going to adjust the camera so you can see the welding a bit better. Okay, I got everything lined back up again. So again, flux core is messy. Just cleaning that up a bit. And that seems to be pretty solid. Like I said, I'm really impressed at the usability of this welder. That synergy feature seems to be really nice. I will say that it's not often that I can weld so comfortably in terms of the speed and the amps on the first try like that. Again, I'm super impressed. If you're a beginner and you're looking for a welder to start with, I think this would be an absolute fantastic option at this point. I have no reason why I would not recommend it. It's easy to set up, it's easy to use, it's small, it's quiet, it's lightweight. It can take advantage of a 220 electric line. Yeah, I'm definitely surprised and would recommend this to especially somebody who is just starting their welding journey or needs a machine that seems to be quite capable, but takes up a very small footprint. If you're just a weekend welder or doing small projects here and there, and you need the ability to weld, but you don't need to spend thousands of dollars and take up a lot of shop garage real estate with your machine, this is absolutely great. I'm just rambling on at this point because I am genuinely impressed at this welder. Like I said, I'm not a professional, but I have been using this quite a bit for a lot of things around the garage. I would almost venture to say that the amount of welding that I do, this machine would be very adequate for. I don't even necessarily need something of this caliber. Anyway, ask any questions below if there's anything that I might have missed in this review. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.